I'm Steve Duke, and this is the Two Roads Podcast. Today on the show, we have Lucy Lee. Lucy's story could be a novel. She was adopted at a very young age and had this really idyllic childhood growing up in England. But in her late 20s, she had translated that idyllic childhood into a very idyllic adulthood. She describes it very much as keeping up with the Joneses. She was working in sales in the UK, making great money, living in a beautiful house in Devon with a Mercedes C-Class in the drive, and she was engaged. But then all that changed, and Lucy took a massive leap to leave all that behind her and follow her gut to do something completely different. Now, I don't want to spoil the story for you, so I'll leave it at that for now. But on this episode, you'll hear about what happened to Lucy after leaving her idyllic adult life behind and moving to the other side of the world. Lucy's career journey from working as a PT to working in sales to now working in sales enablement, and what she enjoys about her job. Why she's done courses in DJing and barista training, how to use life design to work backwards from what you want in life. Why Lucy decided to live a more wholesome life and what that means for her. What Lucy has learned about moving where you live. She's lived in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand over the past few years. And how to make friends as an adult. Lucy has this appetite for life that is very contagious. She's a genuine human who's very open about the lessons that she has learned along her journey. And I think that's what makes this such a wonderful conversation. So just before we get into today's conversation, there's something that I really want to tell you about. And this is something that I've been working on for actually quite some time. If you follow me on Instagram or LinkedIn, you may already know about it. But if not, what I've announced over the last week is a new program called Divergence. And this is all about trying to help people find a job that will actually make them happy. So I started this podcast with that goal. I realized there was a lot of people who were doing a job that they didn't really love, but weren't sure what it is that they did want to do. And hopefully, whether this is the first episode you've listened to, or maybe whether you've listened to many of them, the podcast has been helpful in that way. You've been able to listen to people's stories, hear what they do, maybe get some inspiration or motivation from that. But it's still really hard to actually go through that process of figuring out what specific job is it that you'd like, what sort of lifestyle do you want, and then making that change from whatever you're in at the minute into that new career. And that's what this program is all about doing. So it's a 4-week program specifically designed from all the lessons that I've learned about what works, what doesn't work when trying to find out what it is that you want to do. I'm only going to run this for a small cohort of people on the first time round. So you can sign up now for the waitlist so that when it fully launches and you can actually book a seat on it, you'll be first in line. If this is something that you're interested in, you can find the link in the show notes for this episode. So just in your podcast player, you can open it up, and at the top of kind of the description of the podcast, you'll see the link, and that's what you can use to sign up to the waitlist. And then also, if you follow me on socials, all the links will be there as well. I hope you enjoy my chat with Lucy Lee. Let's get into it. Lucy, thanks for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a bit about what life was like for you growing up?
I'm going to take you all the way back to a lovely small town in the UK in the southwest of England called Lyme Regis. So I grew up there, very small town syndrome, beach life growing up, which I was very fortunate to have. Kind of the white picket fence dream, I would say. That would be the epitome of Lyme Regis. There's 2 types of people from Lyme. They either leave or they stay. Like there's no in between. You either stay in Lyme Regis forever, and it's called seaside syndrome. You just get so used to the nice environment, or you leave and you come back and you appreciate what it is that you had growing up, essentially. So it's kind of 2 versions of people that I think come from Lyme as a child.
When you go back now, are you like, oh, I love this place?
Absolutely love it.
Is that what you would call home?
I pinpoint home now to a feeling probably more than the place, but Lyme will always be that. I had the same school growing up, primary to secondary. Like I've known some of my friends since I was 4 years old. Very lucky to have that place for sure. And you go back now and you're like, oh yeah, this is really, really nice. Like I took my partner back, who's Australian, last year, and she's like, is this where you grew up? I was like, yeah. And it was like 40 degrees. And I said, it was amazing weather. And I said, you can never come back again now. Like, you've seen it at its best. We can probably never go back.
But you weren't born in the UK, right? So you've got an interesting story. You were adopted at quite a young age, right?
Correct. So my mum unfortunately couldn't have children naturally. So my mum is from the south and my dad is a Geordie, and they saw, I think if I can recall the story, it was kind of the fall of the Iron Curtain in like Eastern Europe at that time. So I'm a 91 baby. And there was a lot of children just needing homes and love. So they went out to Eastern Europe and they went to Russia initially and realized there was a lot of corruption going on there. So they decided to go to Bulgaria, and they had a translator called Cyril who and they filmed the whole thing over like a period of time. They were going into orphanages and about me. So there was kind of two, I mean, my mother kind of done two really good things for me. One was she ticked on this birth certificate that I could be adopted, but more importantly, she ticked a box to say that I could be adopted from overseas. So that allowed my mum and dad to be actually able to adopt me. And they flew back and forth between Bulgaria over a period of maybe like, I think it was about 9 months. So they saw me from really super young, like weeks old, I think, and then officially got me into the UK about, I think it was about 9 months old. So yeah, it was a very different start, I guess, to a lot of people.
Do they have like that film?
Yeah, so there's pictures, and I've got it now. It's like only got permanent residency in Australia about a month ago, and I massively reflect on that, and I go, what my life could have been. You know, there was a program that came out in the UK maybe 8, 9 years ago now called From Russia with Love, and they went back to Russia, Bulgaria, and they went and revisited these orphanages of these children that unfortunately were never adopted. And I unfortunately don't even see a similarity there, but it is very much what my life could have been like, and it is a very sad state of affairs what happened out there. And yeah, my mum and dad gave me an opportunity that I'll never be able to repay them for or thank them enough for. But yeah, they then allow me to travel the world and not cling on. Like, I've never been wrapped up in cotton wool. They've kind of let me have my own life and been very supportive of that. So that's been, I think, I look at my mum now and I look, well, maybe I'm going to have kids in a few years or so. And you go, God, would I really let my adopted child just go over to the other side of the world at a pretty young age? So yeah, they did an amazing job.
When you were growing up then in this, very idealistic like childhood on the seaside town, do you remember, like, was there anything when you were growing up that you're like, this is what I want to be when I grow up? This is like my dream job.
I did actually. So I kind of went from three different things. I went from wanting to be in the police. That was like my number one ultimate goal. I wanted to be in the police. My uncle was a detective inspector in the Met, so like really looked up to him, which I probably didn't realize, but then I really did as I grew up. And then I changed and wanted to go and be a PE teacher just because I loved sport. And then I failed my maths GCSE and was like, oh, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I just want to be a personal trainer. So that's when I went into being a personal trainer. But yeah, I've always been, and I remember thinking as a kid growing up in Lyme, like, if you can get to about £30,000 a year, you're doing all right, because they're proper people's jobs, like teachers and doctors and nurses, and then you realise that the cost of living at the moment, I mean, you'd be struggling to actually enjoy life at that, especially in the places like London and the middle of Sydney. The ambitions change as I got older, for sure.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like, I remember kind of having a similar thing growing up, but I think it's like it is about kind of the cost of living of where you are. We both decided to move to, some of the most expensive places in the world. So it's kind of, if we both probably stayed in our hometowns, we could have got away with earning a lot less and haven't been able to support like a slightly more extravagant lifestyle.
100%. It's like those reels at the moment where your family are like, if you don't buy your one coffee a day, you could save $20,000 over 10 years. But it's okay. My family have bought one house and made $1 million because they were baby boomers, and we're just not in that bucket. And I'm not willing to sacrifice my coffee. So
I hate that advice so much. I actually saw this reel the other day and it was the exact same thing, right? It was like, if you don't buy your coffee every day, you will save, $5 a day, and then you will have removed the last piece of joy from your life.
it's literally how I feel. 100%.
But it is interesting as well because, like, the cost of living in some places is obviously super high, and like if you live in Sydney or wherever else, like it's going to be high. But then I'm like, yeah, but I'm paying for like an amazing lifestyle, so it's actually like this is a trade I'm willing to make. Like, I moved here for a reason. Like, I'm happy to to pay the money to be able to kind of have this lifestyle.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so tell me the story then. So you decided you wanted to be a personal trainer. Like, what happens next?
So, in the UK, you do your GCSEs, you go to sixth form, you do your A levels, you go to college and get a BTEC, whatever it may be. I did a BTEC. Kind of everyone goes off, right? And they do their gap years, or they go to uni and do freshers. And I wasn't really sure where I fitted in there at that point. I was like, I don't want to go to uni because I'm probably not academically like there. And I also wanted to be a PT, so what a waste of money in my own head. And at the same time, I wasn't really ready to go traveling. I still felt quite young at that point. So I thought, do you know what? I'll go on a ski season. And I've skied forever. So I went out to Les Deux Alpes in the France and went on a ski season. And of the 6 months, I think I lasted about 13 days. It's become a running joke in my life. I hated it. I was changing rooms one day, got the like read over that morning from the manager of like what needed to be done, like what rooms need to be changed. I looked at it and just went, excuse my French, fuck this. Left the chalet, rang my mum. It was December because she hadn't even made it to Christmas. Rang my mum, went, Mum, I'm coming home. And she went, what do you mean you're coming home? Like pure panic. Like there is snow in the UK. She's like, how are you going to get from the airport back home? And I'm like, don't worry about it. Like I'm done. And that probably sums up a bit my personality. Like if I'm out, I'm out. And if I'm in, like if it's not a fuck yes, it's a no for me. So there was a big part of me that just went, nah, I'm going home. So then I spent the rest of that year kind of waitressing and faffing around and applied for a job at David Lloyd without understanding what a great gym facility it was and health club. Got in there and started working between kids club and reception. And then eventually they paid for my personal training qualification over about a 2-year period. So I had a decent stint there next to David Lloyd, and they were brilliant. They looked after me, and I made some great connections, and that was half the reason I ended up in Australia.
Are you the type of person who makes decisions then very much based on like your emotions or like vibe towards a certain avenue?
Yeah, I'm a nightmare. Yeah, my mum can't cope. My partner describes it as living in a washing machine. You know if you know, right? Like gut feeling, you know if what you're doing it feels right. And for me, I needed to get home. That wasn't right. So I did. Just went, right, okay, let's do this.
Okay, so then you're working in the UK in David Lloyd's, and then what was kind of what led you to make the decision to move to Australia in the first instance?
My friend, who I worked with at the time and is still a friend to this day, she went with her partner at the time, and they went, and she came from a sailing background. And she said to me, she'd been out here maybe 6 months, and she said, if I get you on a yacht loose, will you come to Australia? And I said, a yacht for New Year's Eve in Sydney Harbour. I went, yeah, I'll come out for that. And this went on like it was a running joke. And then one night in the middle of the night, I got a phone call and it was like, Loose, 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 I've booked it. Book your flights. Come on out now. So me and my partner, we booked our flights, and 6 months later off we went. So she's probably the trigger to why we initially came out here, and we landed on New Year's Eve and had an amazing time.
And did you end up on the yacht?
We ended up on a Paralympians yacht for New Year's Eve, very jet lagged, but it was amazing. Yeah, it was definitely a way to land.
Oh my God, that sounds incredible. It's my brother, he lives in Sydney now as well, but he first came out like maybe 4 years ago and he had the exact same experience. He landed on New Year's Eve and it wasn't a yacht. We were on this like tiny little rib that my boss had lended me at the time for New Year's because he wasn't in town. And so I picked my brother up at like 9 p.m. from the airport and we just like went straight to the harbour, basically got on the boat. Like, he was like, I don't know, maybe 19 at the time, and we were sending like pictures to my parents. I was like, the guy's been in the country like 3 hours, and there's a picture of him like with the harbour bridge in the background, like on a boat, like the fireworks going off. It was pretty cool introduction. It's probably all downhill after that.
Best fireworks in the world, aren't they?
So when you moved to Australia, then were you a personal trainer in Australia? Were you like, this is kind of the career I want to go down? Like, were you enjoying it? Is that what you wanted to do at the time?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I wanted to do, and that was kind of the intention. Myself and my ex-partner, we did the East Coast, and we actually had a bit of a fun time. We got a camper van from Sydney up to Brisbane, and we've been watching I'm a Celebrity Get Me Out of Here, like a lot of other English people, and they get filmed or they go out to the hotel in the Versace Plaza Versace on the Gold Coast. So we're like, oh, we'll drop in there for a high tea and a glass of fizz. So we pull up in this juicy camper van. So these, if you're in the UK, massive like green and purple vans, like really ugly things, like proper travellers. And we got out of the car and they went, "Would you like us to take your bags, madam?" And we were like, "No, thanks." So in we go. We have these glasses of champagne, and we sat there and we're like, "Should we just stay for the night?" And he's like, "Should we actually?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's do it." So we actually just stayed in the Versace, not for one night but two. ran out of money poolside, and then started looking for jobs because we'd run out of money. We actually landed and stayed in Broadbeach, which is just down the road, for about 4 months after that period. And that's when I got my job. So I totally fell into gym sales. Applied for a job with this guy. It was amazing, little club in Broadbeach. And he gave me a job in sales, and it was my first exposure to sales. And he used to sit me in a room, it's called Jacques. He'd sit me in this room for like 4 or 5 hours a day and just sales train with me. He'd be like asking me the most awkward questions, and it would go on and on and on. It'd be like objection after objection. That was probably the training I got initially. But yeah, I did very well at that. I was pretty successful in my first few months, and there was a switch that went, well, obviously sales is the right way. Like, Lucy's been told to think before she speaks and is too enthusiastic for the last 20 years. Like, why she not been in sales?
What was it that you think made you naturally good at sales then?
I mean, I've curved it. I've got better now. I can listen to other people. But initially, it was the conversation. I worked in a little shop when I grew up in Lyme Regis called the Slitway, and I was 12. So I worked from 12 to 18 in this little beachside shop. Newspapers, bucket spades, alcohol, like whatever you could think of, that place sold it. So I was working with adults, I guess, since I was 12. So communication, and I learned those skills very young. So I probably credit that to them. And then all of a sudden you realize that you've got this transferable skill set. You can actually just have conversations with a lot of different people and find that common ground.
This guy that was kind of sitting you down and giving you this sales training, asking you all these tough questions and helping you to figure out like how to answer them and kind of refine your pitch or whatever else it is. That strikes me as like an incredibly valuable thing to have. I think especially like early in your career. It's like if you can just find one person who kind of takes you under their wing and is going to put the time into you and be like, hey, you're new at this, you don't know, but I do know, and I'm going to spend a load of time to like make you better. Like that just strikes me as if you can get that early in your career, it just I think it's like so valuable.
Oh, 100%. And it all comes, like, you'll know this as well, right? It's like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That becomes evident when you get into the real world.
Yeah, 100%. Like I've helped a couple of people go through like different job searches over like the past couple of years, and like naturally, especially if they haven't kind of if they're a bit younger, or if they haven't been through the job search before, they're like, oh, like I applied to like all these applications on like Indeed or on LinkedIn Jobs or whatever else it is, and I'm like, yeah, but like the response rates from them is like so low. Like that's honestly, it's not really how anybody gets a job. It's just not. And then you kind of go through the process, and then a couple of months later, they got a job. And like, so how'd you get it? And they're like, oh yeah, so like I met this guy at a bar, and he was telling me about like this thing that he was doing, and then I followed up with it. I was like, yeah, okay, that's it's weird, but like that is just how the world works.
Like, Sydney's a village. Like, the 6 degrees of separation is true in life, and even more since social media. But in Sydney, especially, like, I have never been involved in a work environment where someone knows someone within 10 minutes of having a drink with them. Like, it is ridiculous how quickly you can connect the dots.
It very much is. Okay, so we're at this point. You're working because you spent all your money at this beautiful hotel, and then you need to get some coin back in the bank account again. What's kind of like the next like inflection point for you in your career?
We spent that 12 months traveling but working. And unlike a lot of travelers, I guess we progressed our careers at the same time without really meaning to. But we went back to Sydney, friends were down here, and ended up in another gym sales job. It was actually David Lloyd's sister company in Sydney, randomly.
Who's that?
Next Generation. They're out in Ryde. Really nice. It's next door to the Aquatic Centre. Literally, this Scott Lloyd's got a lot of to do with it. And I ended up in sales there. I ended up the top sales rep out of like 30 of us across 2 countries, and all of a sudden realized I was pretty good at this. The big next inflection was going home. So we decided we wanted to go home. I was very ready to go home, and we moved straight into Manchester. So we've been home like 12 days. We're from Devon, and we were like, we want the city life. So off we go. We're off to Manchester. And I fell into, or I applied for a job, which I didn't really understand what it was. It was called a property sales consultant. I'm not really sure what this is. I ended up being in real estate for a prop tech company, which I didn't even know what that was at the time, but that is what it was. I guess we lived in the UK for about another 6 months. We went through a winter, and I used to just get like really itchy feet. I'll be like, it is miserable weather. We've got nothing to do but go to the pub. Life here is not the same as what I remember. We moved back to Devon because it was just raining in Manchester, so thought that would fix it. Kept the same job, so just travelled back down. They took me. It was a national company, and we bought a house. We thought that would fix it in Exeter. We bought a 3-bed townhouse, and in the same year we bought a Mercedes C-Class. So you just see this life now starting to track, and it's like, here we go. keeping up with the Joneses is happening. And we both had good jobs. We earned way too much money, way too young when I look back. Like, not stupid amounts of money, but we just didn't know what to do with it. So we just drank too much and went on ridiculous holidays, which maybe that's what you should do. Like, when I look back, maybe that was what we should do, really. I remember getting to a point and being like, this isn't what I want. Like, I don't want this white picket fence life. And it was nothing to do with the person I was with. It was the environment in which I was in. And I got engaged in the same year. And again, that was, of course, like probably one of the most happiest times of my life, that engagement and the happiness that surrounded that. But you realize that the pieces just aren't quite clicking. That's the only way I can describe it, is the pieces of the puzzle weren't quite right. I took a job with a company in the UK called Purple Bricks. I ended up training their sales reps and lettings reps. So I was away a lot, traveling every week. And in the end, that kind of ended up dissolving my relationship. It wasn't good for it. I met someone else that year who happened to be a woman. So that really chucked life on its head. This was where the big inflection happened. She was Australian and she came back to Australia, and I had an option. I either stayed and went ahead with a wedding and I would have described my life as 90% better than so many other people's. Like, he was an incredible guy. The lifestyle we had was amazing. It just wasn't for me. So it was either do that or take the risk and just go. So I booked the flight and went to Australia. I went, right, let's give this another go. He didn't want to go to Australia. It wasn't the lifestyle that he wanted, and I just went, well, I do. And the thought of not knowing would eat away at me far more. Like, the what if would eat away, and I knew that, because about my personality, I knew if I didn't know what it was, I didn't care if it was nothing. Actually, I was like, I just need to know what it is, but I can't leave it. So yeah, booked a flight to Australia. If anyone asked, I didn't follow up, but definitely followed up.
Well, this is exactly what I was going to ask. When you booked that flight, in your mind, were you going there for the woman that you met, or were you going there to kind of scratch this itch of like, I feel like there's a different lifestyle that is not what I want, or not what I'm kind of experiencing at home right now?
Both, I think. The commonality which we both had with each other was Australia. Like, that was clearly the initial click. I remember sitting on Formby Beach in Liverpool being like, we could be in Manly and we could do this. And then like 4 years later, we've literally created our life by design and kind of manifestation at its finest. We didn't even realize that's what we're doing, really. But yeah, we really worked towards that.
The way you kind of talk about this time is like you've a very kind of like positive like approach to it, right? Whereas like I'd imagine some people who would be in that situation could feel like incredibly like stressed or like really worried about it, or I can imagine it also be like could be quite confusing for people. Is that stuff that came up for you as well, or were you actually like, no, I kind of know what I want, or I know like the risks that I want to take or the chances that I want to take and go after? What was it like for you around that time?
It was incredibly confusing. Confusing would be a great word. My family didn't know. Remember the fact that I would have just walked away from a wedding, so I couldn't then go, oh, by the way, it was because of this. Like, I didn't know how to even handle that. So my version of handling it was just running, like, run away, like, I'll fix it later. So yeah, it was confusing. The person who knew was obviously me and Lindsay were in that bubble. We knew, but I actually was very honest with the partner that I was with at the time, and very, very shit situation for him as well, right? But he was incredibly supportive. If you were to write down or picture someone that would be as supportive as they could be in that situation when it was horrendous for them as well, he was that. Like, he was as good as he could be. And he actually is in Australia now with his current partner, and they're about to have a child, and life moves forward, and those risks that were taken clearly paid off. But yeah, confusing was the time. And when we came to Australia, I waited about a month and a half before I told my family. And I'll tell you a funny story about my dad when I told him later on. But I told my mum, gave her a couple of days, and she was amazing. She was like, I don't care, like, as long as you're happy. And my mum is incredibly supportive. I'm very lucky with that. My whole family are been really good, but yeah, it would have been a bit a shock to them as well, I think. And the other sort of swing ball to this was I knew I couldn't stay in Australia, so I came for 6 weeks on like a traveling visa, and then actually got sponsorship in New Zealand whilst I was here for a recruitment company. So I went to New Zealand, and I remember saying to Lynn's like, "You got two options. Do you want to come or do you not?" Like, and she'd been away for like 6 years, and she was like, "Have I got to tell my family that I'm going again?" And I was like, yeah, if you want to, like, there's no pressure. And so she came. So we lived in Auckland for about 6 months in the interim, really, whilst we kind of figured out if we were going to get back to Australia, what it was with us. It kind of just gave us that 6 months of just seeing what it was and if it was anything worth pursuing. So yeah, confusing would be a word, but I just kept my head down with what my gut thought. I ignored the noise. Otherwise, I'd probably still be in Exeter in the three-bed townhouse with the Mercedes.
That's crazy to think about the alternative like life paths that you can go down, and like that would be very, very different to your life today, right?
Yeah, massively.
Were you always somebody who was good at kind of tuning into like your gut and kind of, what you wanted? Or is that something that you had to kind of learn more?
I think in more recent years, I've got some friends who are very in tune with themselves. And I've kind of taken it upon myself to learn that stuff and be more grounded and take more time. Like I have a rule now, like I won't live more than 5K, like a 5-10 minute walk from the beach. Like for me, I need the beach. It's like my calm. There's just some things now which are just non-negotiables for me, which mean that I can take the time I need to think decisions through a little bit more when I need to, not quite so gung ho, but always still maintaining that. Like if you feel it in your gut, it's probably right. You just sometimes might need to take a little bit longer to make the decision rather than shotgun decisions like I used to.
Yeah, totally. I imagine people want to know what happens to the end of this story. You kind of left them on a bit of a cliffhanger of like, you end up calling off a marriage, moving across the other side of the world for a woman that you've met. But what happens next?
I mean, it sounds picture perfect. So we now live in Thirroul, just down the road, about an hour down from Sydney. I've got a little dog called Nala. She's a 5 kilo cavoodle, and life's really good. It turned out so far so good. Nothing's perfect. There's been a lot of bumps in the road, but we've always been, and I think this is probably my advice to a lot of people as well, incredibly selfish. And I think that's sometimes looked down upon, like, shouldn't be so selfish, like think of others, but actually it's your life and it's only going to be you at the end of it. And I don't want to get to the end of my life and regret anything. The only things I will regret are hurting people, but sometimes I've had to do that to get to where I need to be. And there was an avoidance that you just couldn't get away from. But yeah, I think we've been like undoubtedly selfish in creating our own life by design. And I'm really not sorry for that.
What's an example of something that you've done that, people might consider selfish?
Moving to the other side of the world without considering anyone else, like how my family might feel, how Lindsay's family might have felt just as she got home and moved to New Zealand. We just kept things really how we want them. Yeah, people have opinions, and often their opinions are a thought of their own life, not yours. Like it's normally a personal problem of theirs that they're putting onto you, is my thought on it.
Yeah, I think that's actually so important because sometimes I think that it's good to do things for other people, right? But doing good things for other people is actually not the opposite of being selfish. You can do both. And sometimes I wonder, it's like if everybody's running around trying to be selfless, trying to like make everybody else happy, do what everybody else wants, then if you kind of take that to its conclusion, it means that nobody's doing what they want to do. So everyone's running around trying to make everybody else happy. And meanwhile, like who's making themselves happy? And so I actually think like being a bit more selfish is a really good thing to do. And sometimes what I've actually found is like being selfish is doing something for others because you say, do you know what? I feel really good when I help out other people. And so in a weird way, I'm actually doing this for selfish reasons. I wrote like an essay on this recently, and I was just like, kind of like the things that I kind of find meaning or purpose in or that make me feel good. And I was like, I like helping people. Honestly, it's not for any kind of like moral reasons. It's because I feel good when I help people. And if that's selfish, then fine. I actually don't care.
Totally.
When we were talking last week, when we caught up, we were talking about kind of living a wholesome life. I think that's actually something that's cropped up with a few of my friends, and they say like, I want more wholesome days or more wholesome moments or whatever else. What does living a wholesome life mean for you?
Living my non-negotiables. So there's things in my day which like I don't want to go to bed not doing. So that would be a walk down the beach, a coffee, a dip if it's warm enough, exercise. So like 10,000 steps as a minimum. Like there's just some things which for me I really try and live by now. If I get to the end of the day and I've done those things, I'm like, oh, I've had a really good day. Like if nothing else, I've achieved those two or three things which make me really happy. And they cost like next to nothing. A $5 coffee in Sydney is about as high as it gets. And I find like I travel quite a bit with work, or I used to, and when I'd be in London, I'd find that tough because for me, like there was no wholesomeness, and that meant like there was no sunlight. The coffee's awful. It's a pub culture, so you go to the pub in the evening. It's late mornings. Like I love getting up early in the morning. For me, that creates a really nice space to have time, and no good idea came sitting at a desk. All my good ideas come when I'm walking. So like therefore a non-negotiable is my steps. Like that's where my brain goes, yay, this is exciting.
Has cropped up a bit as well in other conversations that I've had. I was talking to just a podcast I released yesterday with a woman called Claire Carroll, and she was saying a version of this, which is that she's now finding like so much joy in like normality, like kind of just like the little rituals and things. And, whether that's like getting a coffee at her local coffee shop or like just going for a walk around her neighborhood and like all these little things that when she was younger, she would have heard and probably been like disgusted by, right? It's just like, oh my God, that's so boring. You got to be doing cooler stuff than that. You've turned into like an adult, right? She's like, no, like this is what I love now.
I had this conversation with Lindsay yesterday. I was saying that actually, if I look back on my life, if I had this life now, like 5 years ago, I'd be bored. I wasn't ready for it. It just wasn't right. And I also went sober for a year last year. So I did 12 months sober, and I saw like a Johnny, I think it was Johnny Depp or something like that. It was a clip, and he said, like initially when you give up alcohol, you think your high is like your life's really boring because you're used to like being up here, whether that's through drugs, some people take drugs, some people drink, whatever it may be to get that high. So you live up here constantly. And then when you're not drinking or doing any of that other stuff, you're here. And after like 6 months, you all of a sudden realize here is normal. And so like having that coffee takes you to here, and it's all the smaller things, and living in like the baseline, that's good. Like I believe that's a really good foundation to have had, and I still haven't found one good long-term effect to alcohol, and I will still have a drink every now and again now, but knowing that that affects my routine the next morning, like my wake up, my dog walk, my beach, that's what I try and avoid. Like that's what I don't want it to eat into. So I totally agree with Claire.
I've had a couple of people on the podcast as well who've done something similar, right? Either kind of given up alcohol completely for a stint or like really reduced the amount that they drink. And it kind of seems to be like a common trend among like certain people, especially think like, people who are looking for like a more wholesome life, who enjoy their mornings. And I've also kind of been in that boat where I would have reduced a lot, like the amount that I drink. Here's my one challenge with it, or the one challenge that I have. Okay, it's Friday morning today. It's like I've had a big week this evening. I don't want to go out and get smashed, but I need something to celebrate or to like recognize the end of the week, like something to look forward to. And a drink does that really, really well. And I'm yet to find a good substitute for it. Like something where I like kind of just like signifies like, yep, job well done. You got there. Relax now. Don't worry for a couple hours. I don't need to get smashed, but just like a few drinks and maybe one more than is like, completely reasonable.
There's nothing better sometimes than a glass of red and a roast. Like they go hand in hand. Like I totally get that.
Did you find any kind of substitute for those moments where you're like, I want to celebrate something, or I want to just kind of relax at the end of a week, or like something that you found was good for those moments?
I'd like to be like the Messiah and tell you something incredible. I didn't. I swore to myself I didn't want to take myself out of a social scene. So I would still go to everything that happened. I would just stay on zeros. It was just a little bit boring. But Heineken Zero, there was a thing for me. If it was in a glass bottle, I was okay. I don't know why. And in the UK, you can get non-alcoholic pints at like Brewdog. So again, that was fine. But the reality of it was I got bored at 10 o'clock. I cut everyone off. People got louder. They got annoying. The conversation just got destroyed. And I'd be like, I'm going to catch up with you tomorrow now. So I didn't lose any friends or anything like that. But I had a cut off time at 10 o'clock. I still went to every single social, and people just annoyed me a little bit more after 10 p.m. essentially.
There's probably a good time frame though, because you can just like go home at 10, you can still be up early and like have a good night's sleep, and then you're golden. Okay, let's switch gears then a little bit. So we kind of talked about a lot of your career in terms of like working as a personal trainer, moving into gym sales, working in a prop tech company, and some of the jobs you had there. Talk to me about what you do now. How do you describe that?
Oh, so now I work in an industry called sales enablement. So I essentially work with businesses to help optimize their sales processes, their sales training. implement sales methodologies, and yeah, basically go to market is kind of where the space that I'm in now. When I came to Australia, I moved into a company called HubSpot, which I was a massive fan of, like such a great company to be part of, and almost like the best in class of what they did. So sales enablement was kind of a natural transition. Where I was in most businesses, without sounding big headed, I was always kind of that top percent of salespeople. So all of a sudden, you get to like 10 years in sales, and I was like, I can do more here and I can help more people rather than just making a sale. So sales enablement was a really nice transition of like, you're going to look after people's coaching, you're going to look after their technology stack, and you're going to look after the sales journey. So that for me was kind of where I wanted to go, and where I am now. And I really enjoy that.
For somebody who knows nothing about sales enablement, what does your actual day look like? Like, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis in this role?
It's a fair question. I have to think about it and explain. How would I say it to my gran? I work with businesses to essentially help create or align on their sales processes. So how they deal with a prospect or customer from the first time they meet them until the end of that customer journey, whether that be a closed won deal or the renewal. So I work with the sales reps inside those companies to onboard them, to help with their processes, because if they've got a big technology stack, it's helping use what when. The technology side is a piece of that, and then the process behind that. So whether that's following a sales methodology, or whether that's more one-to-one coaching, or how to use CRM, we help increase revenue. Essentially, is the bottom line. Is the corporate world, I guess, of that. If you're not increasing revenue, see you later.
And what is it about this role that you really like?
People, like, when you tell someone something and they get the light bulb moment, that's what I get to do like every day now, and that is so fun. Making hard stuff sound simple, that's kind of what I'm really good at, and that's probably my like superpower, so to speak. Working in complex technology sales is a weird, strange world with loads of acronyms and people have no idea what you do. So having the ability to make that stuff sound simple to like either my mum or people in the same industry or people I was selling to, I realized was quite a unique thing that I was able to do quite quickly. And that's what I enjoy.
I've noticed that even just from this conversation, that that's a skill you have, and like you're also a very good storyteller. Is that something that you learned?
Yeah, I've just definitely worked a lot on my own personal sales skills. I've put myself through things like Sandler, I'm an ambassador for them, I got qualified and that type of thing. My next piece of work I want to look at is NLP training. 80% of what we hear is actually in tone, it's not what we actually say, all that type of thing, and body language. And I want to really hone down on that. And I know you had one of my friends on, Bex, and one of the things that she's always said to me is, and I live by this now, is like, I never want to be the smartest person in the room. So if I can learn something from someone, like, I'm all in. Like, that's where I want to go.
On Monday, I was down in Melbourne for a piece of work, and I remember like looking around the room, and I was like, I am nowhere even close to the smartest person in this room, and I was like, this is the room I want to be in for sure. And it was just like one of those realizations. It was like, these are all really smart people, but like they're also really good, like kind people, like they've got super experience. I was like, I need to be in more of these rooms, because yes, you learn tons, but then I also get like inspired and motivated by it. Like when you see somebody who's like amazing, that kicks you on to go, oh, like I would love to be as good as, like, even 20% as good as they are.
My manager, who I now work alongside, Danielle, said to me really early on in sales enablement when I was working for her, she said to me, the thing that I love most, Luce, and don't lose it, is you ask the questions which everyone else is thinking. So it may sound silly when it comes out your mouth, but the likelihood is, and I live by this as well now, if you're thinking it, so is someone else. So just ask the question. I think that's probably what I try and do a lot of.
Do you have any other like things like that, like kind of lessons or tips that you've picked up along the years that you try and live by?
I thrive at the deep end, and maybe not everyone does, but like, go for the things that you think you won't get, because the only thing that you'll get from that is your learnings. If you go for a job that you think is too high or it's too much of a leap, the likelihood is you may not get that job, but what you will take away are the skills and where you need to improve. And then the next day you improve that 1%. And it's that 1% every day that makes a massive difference. So for me, I've lost a lot of weight over the last few years, and it was just 10,000 steps, limiting your calories, like all that type of thing. But it was the 1% every single day that made the big difference. I had a a thing. I've done a lot of random. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. I didn't do a huge amount of reading, and I was like, I want to read some books. I was like, right, okay, I'll do one a month. One a month is essentially 10 pages a day. 10 pages a day takes 20 minutes. That's all I did. Oh yeah, 10 pages. It never took, like, when you sit and scrolling, I didn't scroll. Get a book out. So things like that, 1%, chuck yourself in the deep end and just take risks, because often you don't regret the things you didn't do.
I'm actually reading this book at the minute by Stephen King, but it's like his memoir, like about writing. I think he wrote it in something like maybe 2001, or like, more than 20 years ago. And so this is like before the smartphone era. And he is talking about the things required to be a good writer. And he says the number one thing is you have to read. And he was talking about the opportunities to read. He's like, I always have a book with me. And he was like, there's actually so many opportunities when, you've got 5 minutes to kill, you've got 10 minutes to kill, whip out the book, have a read of it. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely doing this, because unfortunately right now, what I use in those times is my phone. How much better is it if you can just like dive into a little book for like 5 or 10 minutes? Which sounds idealistic. Like, I don't know if I'll actually do it or not, but like, it sounds great to me. So I'm going to try and give it a shot and see what happens. I was also stalking your LinkedIn a bit over the past week, and I saw that one of the things you like to do is that you love learning, and that's even evident like from this conversation that we're just having now. What else are you learning about right now?
Okay, so I've actually got booked next week a barista's course. Because I'm like, I want to know how to make coffee. Like, I love it so much. I want to know how to make my own. So I'm going to go and do a barista's course next week. That'll be number one. I am still learning to DJ. So I took up DJing about a year ago. I just bought myself some decks. This is how this happened. I was driving down Spit Road, which is on the way into Manly, and I was listening to Kistry. And it was like Friday anthems or something, Throwback Friday. And I was like, I could do this. This is easy. So that afternoon, I booked a 6-week course and then bought myself some decks. So I'm still trying to improve that, because I'm not ready to be on Kistry yet.
How did you even start on that? Because it feels like something that like there's a little bit of a barrier to even like get anything going. Like, how did you kind of get like take that little first step?
I had the idea at literally like 10 a.m. By lunchtime, I'd found a couple of people in the city who do it. And that night, I'd booked a 6-week course. So it was a local lady in Surrey Hills. I went every Wednesday night for 6 weeks. She was brilliant. And her like job is essentially to run you through this workshop. And then if you want, she'll help you get like booked and onto events and things. So you can actually take it pretty seriously with her. Like, she is really cool. So she is a most boring job in the world. She's a Salesforce like project manager essentially. So really boring about it. She's mid 50s. She's got 2 boys, like long-term husband, and she did the closing parties in Ibiza last year. And I'm like, that's cool. That's like a life by design, right?
What the hell? This person sounds amazing. You'll have to give me your contact details, because this is one of these things that's been on like the back burner for me for a while, of like something that I just like love to try and like see if I could enjoy it. You talk about life by design. People have kind of like different ideas of what that means, but what does that mean for you in your life? Like, how have you applied this?
I am actively actually working on this now. Like, me and Danielle, who I'm going into business with, are working incredibly hard, and she's already ahead of me in this. She's been running her company for a number of years and kind of bringing me into that. But she's moving back to Portugal, and she's going to look after Europe and London, and I'm going to stay in APAC. And the life by design looks like this for me. Like, I want to be able to travel freely between the UK and Australia as many times as I want a year. If I get a business class flight, even better. I want to be able to have a lock up and go in the UK and a house in Australia. Not anything major. Like, I don't want 10-bedroom houses. Like, I just want something sensible that you can fly in between the two. I want to be able to recreate what I had as a child. Now, I thought that was really easy. I look back and go, I had such a nice childhood, but somehow my mum and dad and my family and that environment, I just think was really special. So I want to recreate that. And I want to have a coffee, have a dog walk, go to the beach every day. Like, I actually look at my life by design, and it's not hugely different from what I'm actually living now. If you gave me $1 million tomorrow, what would change? I'd probably just fly business class home. That would be it. There wouldn't be a huge change to my life.
But is kind of the crux of it that you work backwards from those things, right? Because then it's like, okay, if these are the things that are important to you and like what you want in your life, and then you probably work backwards to, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to need X amount of money, or, a job that allows me to travel, multiple times per year. Is that kind of like the idea behind it?
I worked with a financial advisor initially, again from a recommendation of a friend, and I was like, but I've got no money. They were like, no, it's fine, just go and speak to them. I was like, okay. So I went and spoke to them, and these were my ground rules, right? I said, right, I want to retire at 50. I want 2 houses, one in each country. I want an income of X amount of money, residual income, not having to work per year. And we worked backwards, and she went, right, you've got 20 years. She went, I see no problem with that. And I was like, perfect. So it was almost like, again, it's the little things in life, right? Like continue, it's compounding interest. Save what you're saving, and over time you will have wealth. So I work really hard to not only keep 20 years in my brain, because I think, God, anything could happen in 20 years, but how much of that 20-year life can I grab now? And I would say probably 60% of it. I haven't got 2 houses yet, but 60% of that, my day to day is there. I've got to create a residual income and I've got to get 2 places, but working on it.
It's a really nice way to look at things. I can't remember who I had this conversation with before. I think it might have been through therapy, but it was about kind of like understanding, like, I have this idea of like what I want my life to be, right? And the very easy thing to do is then to say, well, to get that, I need to go and get all of these other things, right? That is going to like allow me to have that. And the question that she asked me was like, could you have any of that today? Could you just switch something in your life that's just like you can just have that now? And you actually realize a lot of things. I'm like, I actually could. Like, I don't need to go and like get all of this other stuff to allow me to have these things. Like, you can just change how you're spending your time. Like, a lot of them aren't even like financially constrained. So it's just like, no, these are just choices. Like, you just need to make the decision to like do this thing now and stop waiting, and putting these kind of like clauses on it that, oh, when I do this, then I can do the other thing that I'm actually going to want. It's like, no, just fucking do them now. Like,
Do that, yeah, 100%. And it's that piece like, oh, money doesn't equal happiness, but happiness usually involves money. So it makes life easier, is essentially like the thing that I think of, but it doesn't create happiness. And that's what I've worked really hard to do over the last 5 years, is because I love the Merc, I love the house, I loved all that stuff. But the deep root happiness is in, let's go for a dog walk on the beach in the sun, and you never have to wear trousers. Like, I hate wrapping up. I don't want to do it. So it's like, build the foundations of what you really makes you happy, costing nothing, and then build on that. Because when the wealth then comes in years and years to come, you know that if you lose it all tomorrow, you've got your foundations in a really nice place. And I think that's easier said than done a lot of the time, I know, but that's something that I've personally worked on really hard to make a real life decision on.
you've moved a lot over the past few years, between Australia and the UK and New Zealand. What have you learned about moving where you live?
People are genuinely lovely. Like, you move to new places a lot, you start a lot of new jobs, you've got to become incredibly well versed in making friends. And also, how easy was it to make friends at 5? And then you get to 32 and you're like, oh God, I can't even remember how to speak to people. Like, it becomes so much harder. So, actually, just moving around a lot has pushed me into those situations. And I now would say I have a friends around the world, which is pretty much a village now, where I can go and knock on the door of. And to anyone that's like, should I go traveling? Should I not go traveling? Should I stay where I am? Should I not? Like, for me, it was all about go and experience how someone else lives. You might not want to do that forever. It might not be the way that you want to live, but it's good to learn how other people live and what they live by and what their environment looks like and all that type of stuff. Like, one of my best friends, she lives in London, and she doesn't like Australia. She's like, it's so boring, it's just beaches. And I'm like, yeah, and she lives in London life incredibly well, like a tourist. And I explained to her, I live Australia like a tourist. Like, I still wake up and go, oh my God, look what's in front of me. Yeah, I mean, you're the same, you've moved. Like, we're very lucky, and you can see that when you're here about the environment that you're in.
And I love that idea of like meeting other people and like experiencing different cultures, whatever else. I'm not somebody who I'm like, oh, I have this like big travel bug that I want to, go and like see all of the world. I actually don't really have that. But what I found is when you do experience different cultures and meet different people, you can just like pick up little bits of what they do or little bits of their beliefs or their values. And if something resonates with you, you can hang on to that. And then you can kind of like build your own collage of different things from all different parts of the world, but it's whatever works for you, and that's really nice. But if you don't meet them, then you kind of never get exposed to them, and there might be lots of different things out there that you would really like to do or you find kind of beneficial or whatever else. You kind of talk about that people are really nice. That's a really like positive thing to say. And I actually do tend to agree with you. But you also talk about making friends like in your, late 20s or 30s, and like how that can be a lot more difficult than when you were 5. Is there anything that you found helpful for kind of making friends or building a community when you move to somewhere new?
My word of advice is it just takes time. I think when I first got here, I was like, why don't I have my friends like I have at home? Like, and the reason for that is they're friends that have been friends for 20 years. And that takes time. Like we've got a couple of groups of really core friends out here now, and that's taken 4 or 5 years to build. And it's a two-way thing. Like you get what you give. We've moved an hour out of Sydney now, so it's up to me and my other half to keep in contact with our friends and vice versa. And they come down a lot, we go up a lot, but it's about effort. And as long as we're both putting in that. The other thing I think is really interesting is there's some of my friends at home now who are just friends because we've known each other since we were 4. They're still brilliant people, but they're friends because we've known each other since we were 4. If we were to meet now at 32, we probably have nothing in common. But that doesn't mean they're any less valuable. But I build on both those friendships. Lindsay takes a mick out of me, like between 4 and 7 every night. Like I'm voice noting half of the UK, being like, "How's your day been?" Texting them, FaceTiming my mum. Me and my mum FaceTime every day. Like that's a non-negotiable. I say I'm incredibly selfish. I'm also incredibly loyal to the people that I love and that love me back. And once you're in, you're in. Like Lindsay will be like, "How do you still know that person?" I'm like, "Well, because we met here and we met there, and I keep in contact with people, and I make a conscious effort to keep that circle alive, I guess."
And I think it's like if there's people that you've met, even if you haven't spent that much time with them, if you kind of share certain values with them or you just kind of click with them, it's actually a lot easier than you think to keep a close relationship. All it takes is like maybe a voice note every now and again. And you know what? You mightn't have seen each other for a year or two, but then when you catch up, you get on great. It's not like this kind of awkward, like weirdness. But I think that happens when you kind of click with people.
A little rule: if you're thinking of them, text them. So if I'm thinking of someone, I'll message them, because then you go, "Oh, I'll message them tomorrow," and you don't. So if I'm thinking of someone, I'll just be like, "Just thinking you, hope you're well," or how's this been?" Or just something tiny, but just I always will. If I'm thinking of someone, I'll message them.
I really like that. That's great. I asked people this question and I'm always interested to hear their responses, which is if you were to go back and you just sit down with the Lucy from, let's say, 5 years ago and have a conversation with her, what is it that you would say to her?
Trust the process. It will come good. Just keep doing what you're doing and stand by your morals and stand by your decisions, because like it will come good. Also, when you ask someone to look 5 years ahead, like you go, "Oh, like this might have happened," but they're normally quite small tweaks. When you ask someone to look back, my life's entirely different. So the size of things that have happened 5 years ago are much greater than what I anticipate will look forward in 5 years. So Lucy 5 years ago, I would say stick with it. It's going to be all right. You're going to get through it, and yeah, you will be happy. Be comfortable in the uncomfortable.
And if we were to flip that, right? So you're saying that when you look back 5 years, the kind of level of change that happens in your life is probably much more different to what happens when you think forward 5 years. But let's just say we did look forward 5 years. So let's say we sit down and have a conversation in 5 years' time. Right, I get you back on the podcast, and you say, Steve, like the last 5 years have been amazing. Like they've been so good in ways that, you know, in so many different ways. Like, what is it that you hoped you hope would have happened in those 5 years?
In 5 years' time, I want to be running a incredibly successful business with Danielle between EMEA and APAC. I want to still be living everything that I do day to day now. Like I don't want to swap any of that out. And I'm not even sure if we'll have a house by that point, but maybe there might be another set of hands and feet running around. Maybe there's a thing in Australia that they call little nippers, and that is like, talk about wholesome. Like you go down to Sunday to the beach with these kids and you just chuck them in the surf. Like that's cute. Like I want to do that.
It's absolutely amazing. At the start of this year, I did a bit of a road trip. I drove from like Sydney to Perth over like 3 or 4 months, and you go stop at all these little like beaches and like seaside towns along the way, and you see all the various little nippers that are going out. And then you'd say in campsites, and it was school holidays at the time, so you've got like all of these families who are there with like their little kids and like they're playing cricket or whatever else it is. And tell you, if ever you were somebody who didn't want to have kids and and you wanted to convince them that they did want to have kids, send them on that trip, or just send them down to Nippers, because you're just there and you're like, this is the most wholesome, beautiful thing in the world. I'm like, I want all of the children like now.
So cute. Yeah, it's really cute. Honestly, don't think it's too much changing. I'm sure it will, but I think if I can have a foundation of what there is now and build an incredibly successful business with doing things that I'm genuinely care about, that'd be great. And everyone's still fit and healthy, because I'm really lucky at the moment. You know, living on the other side of the world, you appreciate that your family and friends are healthy. So, touch wood, that continues.
I hope, and I'm sure that all of that will happen for you. You're a very cool person, Lucy. I appreciate you kind of coming on and sharing all of this with me. You've got a very, very, very interesting story. But also, I think what's cool is, like, I would say that you're quite self-reflective as well. So sometimes you have people who kind of built these lives for themselves that they enjoy, but like, by chance. And that's great, right? Like, I'm very happy for those people. But you seem like someone who's kind of been like quite conscious about that, and thinking about like designing your life, and reflecting on like how you make decisions and what it is that kind of brings you happiness, and wanting to have a wholesome life. And so I think it's really cool to talk to somebody who is reflective in that way, because it means that they can share like their journeys with other people, and people can hopefully take something from that as well. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too. I hope it was fun for you.
Yeah, it's been really good. I appreciate you having me here.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation that I just had with Lucy. If you did and you want to help the podcast, there's two things that you can do. One is leave us a review. Just hit the stars button on whatever podcast player you use. And the second thing is to share it with a friend. If you think this episode or one of the other episodes might be helpful for somebody who's going through their own journey of trying to figure out what they want to do, if they're considering a career change or have a big life decision that they need to make, share this with somebody. I would really appreciate it, and hopefully it will be helpful for them too. But that's all for now. I'll see you next week for episode 32 of the Two Roads podcast.